Hey there folks, so we're going to go over laying out Shiribasami Tsugi. So this is a Japanese scarf joint and it can be used, it's an oblique scarf joint, meaning it has these surfaces that normally in Western style timber framing you would see horizontally, but this type of scarf joint, these faces are actually going to be vertically. So the way this scarf joint works is that there's an exact piece that looks just like this and it slides in here, and then over here there's going to be a gap, so you slide a set of wedges in there to tighten and push the other blade into here, and then this blade moves into the opposite mortise over here. So very strong, very capable scarf joint. I absolutely love it. It's actually relatively easy to mark, lay out, and to cut, but I'll show you some of the techniques that I use. Anyway, Shiribasami Tsugi. So this is what the final product should look like. So we're laying it out on this piece over here. So this is what your layout should look like at the very end, and I'm going to show you exactly what I do. So typically scarf joints are going to be about 3 times the depth of your material. In this case, we're working with a 5x5, so 3 times 5 would be 15 inches. So this distance from here to here is 15 inches. From there to there is 15 inches. And mind you, I am using center lines, which is a typical conventional method for this sort of joinery. If you're using square rule layout, you might have a little bit of trouble. If you do have any sort of deviation, any sort of out of squareness, it'll cause this joint to not be as functional or as tight, really. Anyway, 15 inches from here to here, so that's 3 times the depth. The other thing that you'll notice is that there's these little cogs over here. So those small cogs are 15 millimeters. And that, conveniently enough, is the size of these pieces for the Japanese square. So this is 15 millimeters from here to here. So we are using both a regular Western framing square and the Japanese square. So this is the larger version. There's also some smaller versions of Japanese squares, and you know, either one of these works perfectly fine, but this one allows you to get a better square, overall squareness. And so since we are referencing that center line a lot, the longer blade over here, or tongue, whichever one you want to call it, allows you to set this square up more accurately. So to get those squares, I use the size of the square right there and lay it out. So I've already done this side and transposed it to one of the faces. We still have the other side to do, so there's plenty of work. So let me walk you through it. So what I mean by transposing is I took this cut line, and the center line all the way to this face. I still have this other face and the opposite cut face to do. So let's rotate this 90 degrees. So now what I need to do is get those lines onto this face right here. So looking at it vertically, I can start the line at the very end right there, so I can reference it with my square. And so when I start to lay this out, I chose this arbitrary line right here. So I've already cut this post to the approximate length. For this project, it's going to be roughly 8 feet and a couple inches. So I made this post 9.5 feet, right? Just in case I have any trouble with this joint, I can cut it off and start again. Now I know that I have a cog before this cut line over here, and that cog is 15 millimeters. So I left me about 1 inch of material here to allow for that 15 millimeter bit, and then enough material so I could get a saw in there and cut it accurately. So this is where I started. Then I measured 15 inches down, right? So from here to here, once again, is 15 inches, and that's how I started out. Anyway, to get those lines from there to this face, use my square. I'm going to get the blade lined up right here. And I'm squaring up the carpenter square. So by that I mean I'm trying to cover that center line entirely with the blade. or rather consistently, right? So if I am off the line like this, then I have to be off that line and uniformly across its length. But I find it's easiest to just cover the line entirely and kind of see where the line exits on both sides. So I should have that 2-inch line matching up right here with that center line. Okay, and then of course I need to line it up with this tick mark that I have over here. And of course my square is only so long, so I can only get the line to there. So now I just come over here, line up the straight edge. I'm not referencing anything on this side. All my references are right here now. And I'm just continuing that straight line all the way across. And this line is now going to be important when I go to that face. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to take those lines over here. This is the center line, and the reason why I want the center line is because all the joinery that's going to be remaining on this post is referenced from that center line. So that's typical in Japanese carpentry, to not actually reference shoulders, but to reference the center line of joinery. So this center line will now correspond to the center line of the opposite scarf joint, and those two should line up. Anyway, and let's do this guy as well. I think this is the one drawback of centerline joinery, is that it does take an awful lot of time to lay out joinery. However, it is much more precise. Okay, so we've done 1, 2, and 3 faces. Now we're going to move on to the very last face. So, in this case, I don't necessarily need to reference the center line to get my initial measurements over here, or to get these lines over here. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm just getting those tick marks over to this face so that easier to reference. Okay. So now what I'm doing is I'm just connecting those 2 dots. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to the center line and taking one over and then taking the other over. Although we can always check, and very likely they will be square, but in some cases, if you do have any sort of sloppy layout, then it'll be compounded if you start to do that. So here, let's go ahead and check it either way. And so I put my square on the center line. Let's see if it lines up. And yeah, it lines up pretty darn well. So I run my pencil through there, and that line is perfectly square to the center line. Okay, so let's do this one. Okay, and then the last one. Okay, and we can do one final check over here before we get rid of this square, and this should be 15 inches. And it is exactly 15 inches on the money. So remember, when you take these measurements, you have to account for the pencil thickness. So if I were to strike a line over here, it would be 15 inches plus however much this pencil offset and thickness is. So you can see that there's, almost about a millimeter, which normally would not matter, but in this case, you're trying to get as precise as possible off the get-go. So, okay, great. So now, we're going to go ahead and lay out those blades that are over here. But first, we have to kind of orient ourselves. So, see, on this side, so the part that we're taking out is this face right here, meaning now it's on the bottom, meaning now it's on this side right here. So for this scarf joint, we're going to remove material that's over here, which means that the blade on this side, the cog, is beneath the center line, so the cog should be over here. Okay, and that's where we're going to start. We're going to start by laying out. So you can come over here. I can set it square to that line that I drew, and I want to cover the line, once again accounting for pencil thickness. Right, so this square is now perfectly on that line that I drew across this face. And I'm just going to go like this, and that is the end of my scarf joint right there, the cog. And now I'm going to lay the square on the center line, and I'm going to do 15 millimeters in that direction, which is, once again, the thickness of this square. Excellent. So, like we were saying, this is going to be removed. So now the cog over here is in the opposite side. So it's right here. It always helps to kind of draw roughly where it is that things are going to go. That way you can sort of visualize it. Especially, so that's how I develop plans, is when I do the plans up for like a cabin or a pergola or a gazebo or, you know, whatever pavilion, I'm not laying out each member. I lay out one principal member with all the joinery that's involved in there, and it's up to you to kind of go back and visualize the joinery for each of the individual members. So like I said, this guy is going to be over here, so 15 millimeters up from the center line. It's opposite from that guy, and now 15 millimeters that way. So we're going square to this line and 15 millimeters. Remember to cover the line with the square. Okay, so there you can see it. Now I'm going to match up. Let's see, which points did I do on the other side? So what I'm trying to debate now is you have to lay your square like this and then trace out the lines, but there's a specific set of points over here that you have to reference, and I forget exactly which ones I did, so let's take a look at the other side. So it looks like I did the ones on the center line. Yep. Center line to that one. Okay. So over here. So I'm matching up this point right here to this point right here. So now draw a straight line like this. All I need to do is cross that center line. And on this side, it's going to be the opposite side. Okay. So now, yeah, you can see the line right there and right here. But this blade doesn't stop right here. this blade is going to continue 15 millimeters this way. So here's a center line, right? So I need the square to be perpendicular to that, parallel to that blade. So here's my 15 millimeters. And so this is not one of the initial cuts that we're gonna make. The initial cut that we're gonna make is gonna be the stop cut right here. And then we're gonna do a rip cut like this. And we're gonna take off all that material. Then we're gonna work on this lower lip up until here. And then we're gonna work on this blade right here, and that surface right there. And then finally we'll work on the mortise for these cogs and that small tenon. That's kind of how it goes. So don't let this layout look intimidating to you. It really is just dependent on this square. So like I said, most Japanese joinery is in the 15 millimeter to 30 millimeter range. And they found that to be sufficient for tenon thickness as well as peg sizes. And this joint is extremely capable. So yeah, and then one more thing to be able to kind of look at this guy is to mark off the top over here and say that, yeah, that's what it is that we're going to be removing.